My childhood was fairly happy memories, and I enjoyed it growing up. I can remember, riding my tricycle around the back garden. The child of immigrant parents who came out from the Netherlands in the 1950s. They moved to South Africa. I was born and raised in Melville, in the Melville area for most of my life. My father worked away, out in the field most of the time, so he was away for long periods of time. And so I was raised by my mother for most of the time. My childhood was fairly happy memories, and I enjoyed it growing up. I can remember, riding my tricycle around the back garden. Sort of at the age, I don't know if it was 4, 5, or 6, but it's like a picture, just a picture that came back to me, where I would look down and there would be a woman's head in my lap, and I can only assume that they were performing oral sex on me. I felt often that I was like a target for people. Men would just come up and start fondling me, and sometimes even stick their hand down my pants and just grab my penis and play with me and then walk away. An incident that happened to me, I remember, I was 12 years old, and I was on holiday, and my father had left me there because he had something to do back home. So he'd left me there for like a week or 2. I was staying with somebody, and I kind of shared a room with his children. They were all girls. I remember they were partying. They were much older than me, and they were partying and drinking and having fun, and I was too young. I was 12 years old. I didn't drink at that time. And I went to bed, and at about 1 o'clock in the morning, somebody climbed into my bed, and I could feel that they weren't wearing any clothes. Next thing I realized that it was a woman. It was one of the daughters. She must have been 6 years older than me, 5, 6 years older. With men it's difficult because you get erect, and your brain just moves from your head to your nether regions, and you don't think properly. It's not easy for us to in that moment say no. And we also don't know, you're not experienced enough to be able to say, no, don't touch me. We had sex, as much as it could be sex at the age of 12. I didn't understand what was happening. But the one thing I remember afterwards was that I felt sick. I felt so sick. I remember climbing out of bed 3 or 4 times that night. Yeah, when I went into high school after that incident, I met an older guy. I must have been about 13 then, and he started luring me in and grooming me. It was a long process. Probably took him about a year to kind of ensnare me, and over that year he would take me skiing, take me flying in light aircraft, and kind of all the things that young boys love doing. And I remember going there that first weekend where I was really nervous, because in his house there was only one bed. And I kind of said to him, so where am I going to sleep? He goes no, we'll just sleep together, nothing will happen. And we were both in this double bed, and he would put pillows between us, and it would make me feel a little bit safer. I didn't sleep well because I was nervous, But he was a patient guy, and he would do that for like a month, and then the pillows would disappear, and then it would be, oh, just give me a kiss goodnight. And I was like, I don't want to kiss you, you're a man, Oh, no, we're friends, we love each other. A month later, it would be like fondling you, and you would get erect, and then he would say, see, you enjoying this, you know? And he just chipped away slowly but surely. And then it was oral sex, and then it was masturbation, and then it escalated as the time went by. He was a bit of a freak, so he loved to smell and lick feet. Weird, you know, and then whilst he was doing that, he would masturbate, and that would be the thing that floated his boat. When he started that, I would be like, no, that's weird, and I would like read a magazine, seriously. And then eventually he would say, no, you have to masturbate with me because he feels embarrassed. I'm going like, freaking hell, you feel embarrassed, you know? Imagine what I'm feeling like. It's like you masturbating and licking my feet. I mean, it's weird. And then you had to join in with it and play the games with him so that he could feel better, you know? And eventually you kind of just lose your soul. I remember one of the things I did to kind of cope with this was I started drinking. Every weekend you drink as much as you can, and then with this guy, it was easier because there was always drink around. So we would train hard early in the morning, and then in the afternoon we just like braai and drink. And so there I was as like a 14, nearly 15-year-old boy, just getting slaughtered, you know. It would kind of not suit him because if I was drunk, nothing could happen. So he started getting ways for me to stay sober. So he would say, okay, well, I need you to drive the car home. So I would have to stay sober, you know. And then when we got home, then it would give him an opportunity to do things with me again. It was a difficult time, eh? So I lived a double life until I was 19, where on the weekends I was this little sex toy for this man, and during the week I had to be a normal child, going to school, trying to have friends, trying to have girlfriends, you know, just trying to be a normal kid. And it just wasn't working, you know. So I started drinking and drinking more. And then I thought, oh, the one thing I need is to have a child. You know, if I had a child, I'd be happy because I've always wanted to have a child. One of the things that stands out most for me was I was 16. I went to a church, and I remember I was so desperate to tell somebody. I was so desperate to find help and get somebody to talk to. And I remember walking around the church, and it was a round church, and I would go up to the door and push it and then pull it, and it would be locked, and then I'd walk around to the next one. I must have tried 4 or 5 doors, and I walked away, and I was really emotional. And I remember looking up at the sky and going, God, I hate you, you don't exist. And I got on my motorbike, and I think I was riding home, and I was riding towards a bridge. I thought, if I go fast enough and I ride into the pillar of the bridge and I can kill myself, then all of this will be over, you know, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. This little voice said to me, oh, you'll probably mess this up too, and I'll end up in hospital on like machines with pipes coming out of me. So I chickened out of that. Also going looking for help, you know. Like you go to these centers that are supposed to help victims, and you walk in and the posters, all the adverts are always, the victims are always a little girl and the perpetrator is always a man. And that wasn't my story, you know. I was a little boy, and it was women and men that were hurting me. I kind of would look at those posters and I'd go, well, you know, I'm the freak, it only happens to me. And I would leave, and yeah, I would never get to talk to anybody. We used to get called up for our 2 years military service. I managed to get a transfer through this man that was using me, and I got transferred to the Air Force. And I remember one day I was running, and I kind of looked down at my bicep, and I thought to myself, you're crazy because you're actually quite a big guy. Yet I couldn't tell these people to leave me alone. I couldn't tell this man, just don't touch me, leave me alone. And I kind of made a decision there that day that I would tell him to leave me alone. Did my 2 years military service, and when I came out, I just hid. You know, I used to move every year, I changed jobs every year. actually I was just hiding away from this guy. So I never used my strength or my power as a man to push him away and tell him to leave me alone. I was 25 or 26 when I met a young girl, and by 27 we were married. And the weird thing is, I don't think I actually even loved her. I was just desperate to be normal. You know, society tells us that you've got to have a wife and 2 kids and 2 cars and a microwave oven and a television and all that stuff. So I was just trying to fit in to what society was telling me would be good for me, you know. And I tried hard. I really tried hard to love her. I think I was a nice, kind husband. But I think one of the effects of having this double life and living this lie all the time is that you get angry. You know, you build up this resentment and this anger because people don't understand you. You know, people don't know what you've been through, and you kind of skate on this edge of anger and happiness. I would never hit anybody. I would like punch doors and punch cupboards and punch walls. Broke my hand I don't know how many times. There was just this rage inside of me, you know, upset with life, you know, just going, when you wake up in the morning, you go, oh, no, not another day. And you just never find your place in the world. And this anger just builds, and the best way to deal with the anger is to get drunk. And then I've thought, oh, the one thing I need is to have a child. You know, if I had a child, I'd be happy because I've always wanted to have a child. Eventually, I was 36 or 37 when my daughter was born. And I thought this was going to be the happiest day of my life, but I've got to tell you something, I was so scared. I mean, I loved her, and I think it was the first time I ever unconditionally loved anybody in my life is when I met my daughter for the first time. When I looked into her little face, there was a love there that I never understood, love there that I'd never had. And I actually remember thinking to myself, when I looked in her little brown eyes, I said to myself, I'll die for you. And that kind of what, to me, is what love is about. If you're going to die for somebody unconditionally, and I would die for her, you know. I remember this day like it was yesterday. I was 37 years old. I was sitting in my house, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and I sat on the end of the bed, and I was looking through at my wife and daughter, and I heard this voice that just said, "Hello, Martin." And in an instant, I knew who it was. It was that guy from my childhood. That guy had finally found me. The sound of his voice just drove fear into my heart. It was crazy. And I was like, "What do you want?" And he was like, "Oh, I've missed you, and I haven't seen you for such a long time, and you know, we can be friends, you know, we were so close." I couldn't believe this guy. I mean, the fact that he was actually phoning me and saying that we were friends and that we were close, I couldn't believe it. And you know what, and I looked through the door and I looked at my baby and I thought to myself, you know what, this guy's not going to get close to my child because he's not going to do to her what he did to me. And I said, if I see you within 100 yards of my family, I'll kill you. I'll personally rip your throat out. And I slammed the phone down. And that was the first time in my life I'd actually taken charge of my own life. It was the first time I'd told somebody that was hurting me that I'm not interested in your nonsense. And I've never heard from him since. But the weirdest thing is that you get this society tells you that because you were abused as a child, you're going to be an abuser. And then you have this little baby lying in front of you. Now you know that you love this child and that you'll never hurt this child. But one part of your brain is saying you're going to. Yeah, I couldn't live with that, so I just started drinking more. You know, I would come home from work, and instead of having a tot of gin or vodka or whatever, I would drink a whole glass full. And I knew that the quicker I got drunk, the sooner my wife would say, well, you can't touch our daughter because you'll hurt her. And that was what I wanted. I didn't want to touch my daughter because I was afraid that I'd hurt her. It's difficult for men to talk about this because society constantly tells us that men don't get abused. took a long time, and I think I was 42 years old when I think the realization that I wasn't a full-blown alcoholic at this point in my life kind of struck home. We were trying to have a second child, and the doctor said to me, just stop drinking for 6 weeks. And I said to him, no problem, that's easy, I'll do that. And like after 3 days, I was like edgy and angry and so desperate to have a drink. And then I realized I'm an alcoholic. It was like a reality that kicked in so strongly. I could actually fill my lungs. I felt this weight lifting off me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. And then they said if you were sexually abused as a child, it doesn't mean that you're going to go on to abuse your own children. And like in that instant, I felt relieved because I knew what was wrong with me. I could start dealing with things, I wasn't alone anymore. On this very show, it was called The 200 Men. They had 200 men in the studio, and every single one of them had suffered what I'd suffered. I wasn't the only one anymore. I started dealing with all the stuff that had happened to me. I started going through all the things that happened in my life. I started having flashbacks. It was incredibly painful. It was really difficult to deal with. About a year and a half later, I felt I got to a place where I was able to start giving back to other people. I kind of decided in my mind then that I was going to start an organization that would support men that were recovering from sexual abuse. And one of the biggest things I had to do was tell my story. One of the biggest things I had to do was tell them that they weren't alone. One of the biggest things I had to do is use my story to help them realize what had happened to them. I started an organization called Matrix Men, and for the last 9 years, that's what I've been doing. If I was to meet my abuser now, genuinely, I think I just feel sorry for him. I've dealt with enough people to know that he'd probably suffered some form of neglect, abuse, and all that sort of stuff in his lifetime. But there was a point in my life where I hated this guy so much, and I used to fantasize about how I was going to kill him and torture him and sort of get revenge. But I think the hardest part of that was understanding that I wasn't really that type of person. I wasn't an angry, vengeful, hateful person, and thinking things like this was, for me, very difficult and very confusing. Right now, I wouldn't be afraid of him because I know who I am and what I am. And I would just feel very, very sorry for him. All of the people that hurt me, I've forgiven them. Because, I learned a very valuable lesson in life that anger and hatred and revenge is a poison pill that I take to make the other person disappear. It just kills me. It doesn't kill them. They carry on with their lives like nothing's happened. And I'm filled with this resentment and this anger. So I've forgiven everybody. I genuinely have. It's difficult for men to talk about this because society constantly tells us that men don't get abused. Men are not raised to be able to talk about things. You know, when we're children, when you fall and you hurt yourself and you start crying, the first thing your parents say to you is like, oh, stop crying, man, it's not that bad. The message we send constantly is that we're not allowed to feel emotions, we're not allowed to cry, we're not allowed to be hurt, we're not allowed to talk about things. We must just man up, suck it up, move on. So I think one of the most important things for boys that are going through this sort of experience to remember is that you're not alone. You know, in South Africa, the statistics are between 36.9% and 44% of all boys will have suffered some form of sexual abuse by the age of 18, whereas girls, it's 33.6%. So we in fact have more boys that suffer this than girls do. And it does change. It's not a competition, believe you me, but it changes when girls get older, then it's girls that get raped more often. But until that point, boys suffer more. And you guys must understand that you're not alone, you're not the only one, and that there is now help available for the boy child that has suffered this sort of abuse. And I encourage guys, you know, the best way to deal with this whole issue is to talk about it. You know, I heard earlier in my recovery, I heard a saying that was, the more I talk about this, the easier it gets. And I can promise you that that's true. I've spoken about this for 9 years, and quite often when I'm finished an interview or when I finish talking at a function or something like that, I kind of have to go back and reassess what happened to me. And I sit down and I go, is that really true? Did all of that happen to you? And it's almost like it's now removed from me. It's a story I tell, it's not my story. So it does definitely help. The more you talk about it, the easier it gets.